The Tycoon's Bride. Part 2. Chapter 7. Jacob Whitmore was terrified. He stood on the balcony, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. I braced myself, expecting him to snap, to tell me I was out of line, or that he didn't owe me any explanations. But when he turned to face me, his eyes betrayed him. There it was, something I never thought I'd see in the sharp blue fire of his gaze: fear. The anger that had been burning inside me melted away. My heart clenched as I rushed toward him, my own fears clawing at my throat. Before he could even open his mouth, before he could say he was fine, I wrapped my arms around his neck and held on like my life depended on it. "It's going to be okay, baby," I whispered, squeezing him tightly. I wanted to believe my words. We could handle anything together. We had to. But he didn't hug me back. He pulled away almost immediately. When I looked into his eyes again, the vulnerability was gone, hidden behind the same guarded wall he always put up. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said, his voice quiet but steady. I blinked, startled by the apology. Jacob didn't apologize ever. But I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. Squaring my shoulders, I planted a hand on my hip. "I was worried, Jacob. I didn't know if it was me or someone else." "Like who?" His face turned to stone. "Rachel." I waved a hand dismissively. Just hearing her name made the air feel thick with tension. "Or whoever," I said firmly. I locked eyes with him, determined to make my point. "The problem is that you didn't talk to me. You didn't trust me enough to handle it." I paused, shaking my head as he opened his mouth to argue. "No excuses, Jacob. You hurt me. I'm your partner, remember? We're supposed to be a team." His jaw tightened, and I could tell he wasn't thrilled about being shut down. But I wasn't done. I reached out and touched his cheek, my fingers brushing lightly over his skin. His eyes fluttered shut, and for a moment he leaned into my touch. When he opened them again, they were softer, full of something I could never get enough of. Love. He took one of my curls between his fingers, his voice low and filled with intent. "You know I hate repeating myself, but I'll say it again. I shouldn't have kept this from you. You mean everything to me, Lay. I don't ever want you to feel like I'm shutting you out." He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine, his words wrapping around me like a warm hug. "I love you. And I'm sorry." Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. Instead, I lifted onto my toes and kissed his cheek. "So you have a long-lost brother," I said, nibbling my lip as I tried to make sense of it all. "That should be good news, but it's not." Jacob let out a long, exhausted sigh. "It's not about good or bad. I wish it were that simple." He yanked at his tie, then gave up and pulled it off completely. Turning to the fire pit, he grabbed the bottle of wine sitting on the cart and took a swig straight from it. I blinked. Jacob never drank like that. But instead of calling him out, I bit my tongue. I just told him he could lean on me, that I was his teammate. The last thing he needed was me gawking like he'd grown a second head. I sat down on the chaise, waiting as he drained the bottle and slammed it back onto the cart. The clang made me jump, but I kept my mouth shut, patting the seat next to me. He finally sat, staring up at the night sky. For a while, we just sat there, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the faint hum of the city below. Then finally he spoke. "It happened 2 weeks ago," he began, his voice steady. "I was at Bite with Kirkman, talking about the expansion." I nodded. I remembered that meeting. He hadn't been thrilled about it. We'd just ordered drinks when this kid, one of the staff, ran up to the table. He wasn't our waiter, and he could barely string 2 words together without stumbling. I thought he was just a fan. I was about to thank him for watching the show when he said it. Jacob's lips tightened into a grim line. He said he was my brother. The questions that had been buzzing in my head spilled out at once. What's his name? What does he look like? Where has he been all this time? Jacob didn't even look at me. "His name is Cole Summers. He's shorter than me, lean, blonde with my mother's eyes." I froze. "He's Alicia's son?" Jacob nodded grimly, and the weight of his words hit me like a freight train. All this time, his mother had been keeping this secret. I reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Jacob," I said softly, "what are you going to do?" He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know where to start." He squeezed and released, his fingertips just barely kissing my skin. I was just as surprised when Cole dropped the bomb. Kirkman made up some sort of excuse and left me alone with him. Before I could ask for proof, he whipped out a manila folder. Inside was a birth certificate with my mother's signature. Jacob withdrew, slumping back against the chair. He went on about his life, but I zoned out, completely locked on the birth certificate. I was entranced by my mother's signature. I traced every curve, wondering what was going through her mind. I raced through memories, images, trying to figure out if I noticed weight gain or any strange cravings. But how would I? Boarding school was my home. I only came home for Christmas break, and that Christmas I was with my grandparents. Once I started questioning if it was all some conspiracy, I just stopped. I told him I needed to do my own investigation, and I'd contact him once I verified his story. I went to my mother, who categorically denied the whole thing, until my investigator proved Cole was who he said he was. I was literally just at that witch's house, and I wanted a do-over. Instead of finishing my water, I should have thrown it, and the fancy cooler at her head. The act of keeping Cole a secret was bad enough, but to prolong the inevitable and lie to Jacob's face? That was just cruel, even for Alicia. I tried to grasp at the positive. Jacob had a brother. This was an opportunity. I still had so many questions. What was he like? He seemed friendly. Jacob massaged his neck, rolling his head from side to side. Polite, other than dropping the bomb during my business meeting. When I told him it wasn't the time nor place, he backed off immediately. He said he'd wait at the cafe across the street if I wanted to talk. Since Kirkman was no help at all, and excused himself, I had no reason to not take the kid up on his offer. Kid? He'd been tossing that word around. How old is he? 24. I waited for more. Anything. But Jacob was staring up at the sky like figuring out the cosmos was preferable to talking about any of this. I was balancing on a tightrope. Cautious. Mindful of every movement. The wrong move, the wrong question could send me spiraling. So I chose to roll back onto the chair and give Jacob some time to breathe and process. Once I stopped waiting for him to tell me every last detail, he opened up. I met him at the cafe. Before I could even get the word money out, he made it clear that he didn't want a dime. He pulled out the folder again and pulled out that damn certificate dash. Jacob stopped and I turned to him. I saw the way he clenched and unclenched his fists. His relationship with his mother had always been a difficult one. Alicia couldn't take out her frustration about her husband's infidelity on its rightful target. So Jacob was left with a mother that treated him like an inconvenience. But this was bigger than sending him off to boarding school and ignoring every sign that he needed more, deserved more. I just knew it was my father. After Venice and everything in his track record, it was right up his alley. Seeing her name on that certificate was like a knife to the gut. So I had the most awkward cup of coffee of my life, took the folder, and we parted ways. Then I did my own research. I learned everything there was to know about Cole Summers, and throughout the whole process, I kept hoping that I'd find out there was some mistake. I bargained with a god I haven't talked to in years. I asked that if Cole was my brother, to make him Carlton's son because keeping it from me was too cruel, even for my mother. He went still, dangerously so. When I pulled myself up and leaned in, I saw he wasn't as still as I thought. His fists were twitching, like he was dying to punch something. Or someone. Jacob, are you okay? Am I okay? His voice was like smoke, wild and elusive. I had to have a brother. All those years when I thought I had no one. A father who didn't give a damn. And a mother who cared about everything but her son Dash. He cleared his throat, and in that moment I knew I'd get no more out of him. The pain Alicia caused ran too deep, and if my head was spinning with all of this, Jacob had to officially be in fuck this territory. So I put all questions about what came next on hold, and committed Jacob's brother's name and place of employment to memory. You hungry? I chirped. Pasta sounds kind of perfect right now. He grunted something that sounded like sure, and I practically flew back into the apartment. I was a flurry of hands and pots and noodles, only pausing when I turned to the fridge. I held onto the bar with both hands, breathing deep and exhaling until I felt like I'd pushed all the air from my body. Emotions consumed me, running the gamut from choke my mother-in-law angry to heartbreaking sorrow for Jacob. What he said about having someone, having a brother or sister to turn to, having someone. Tears stabbed my eyes as I tore open the fridge and dove into the produce drawer. The tomatoes stood no chance as I sliced and diced brutally. I flipped on the stove, mesmerized by the flame. There was no changing the past. No way to turn back the clock and give Jacob and his brother the childhood and relationship they deserved. But they could still get to know each other. They just needed the opportunity. I turned to face the dining room table, a plan taking root. I couldn't take away Jacob's pain, but I could help him get to know Cole. Chapter 8. With everything going on with me and Jacob, I'd been dodging my mother's phone calls. On one hand, her fierce love never made my question if she truly cared for me. I knew that my mother loved and supported me, that at the end of the day when the dust settled she'd be there. But it wasn't all warm and fuzzy. The fierce part meant that she was incapable of not meddling, incapable of not pushing me in the direction that she felt was right. My desires be damned. Returning her calls before would have meant lying, which would have been pointless. Even via phone she would have sniffed out the truth, and then she would have showed up at our doorstep, ready to play relationship therapist. But now that the truth was finally out, and in the open, I didn't send her call to voicemail when her name splashed across my screen. I took a deep breath as I backed out of the parking space and angled toward the exit. Hi Dash. Is everything okay? I've been calling, and I had this bad feeling in my gut. She took a breath. Is everything okay with you and Jacob? Her sixth sense was downright eerie. I glanced at my phone in awe, then remembered I was driving downtown, where I'd need every sense and ounce of attention on the road. Everything is fine, Mom. Sorry it took me a bit to get back to you. A bit, she snorted. It's been nearly 2 weeks. If it wasn't for your father, I'd be in the city right now. The phone shifted, the crackling sound probably the result of her shifting it to her other ear, to give my dad a look. Her volume dimmed, the next bit for him, but I still heard her loud and clear. I was not overreacting, Earl. She could have been dead in a ditch or God knows what. Luckily, I'm not dead in a ditch. I shook my head, smiling at my mom's brand of crazy. It just wouldn't be complete without the necessary guilt trip. Work has just been crazy, Mom. Aha. Her disbelief oozed from the phone. Well, I'm glad you could squeeze me into your busy schedule. Like she could sense me rolling my eyes and fishing for an excuse to cut the conversation short. She changed strategy. How are you? I'm good. Now was left unsaid. I had no interest in hashing out what happened between me and Jacob. The last time I let it slip that there was trouble in paradise, she launched a mission to fix my relationship that ended up making Alicia avoid any functions that had my mother's name on the RSVP list. There was no love lost between the two of them, and learning that Jacob's mother had a child that she kept from her son for 24 years would do their tenuous association no favors. And Jacob, he's good too, I said cryptically. Everything is good. Aha. I rolled my eyes, glancing at my screen. Just a few more blocks until I arrived at my destination. How about you and Dad? Your dad is just fine, working on his latest project in the garage and keeping all sorts of noise. And I'm doing just fine, worrying about my only daughter, but fine. Don't worry about me, Mom, I sighed. I'm living the dream, remember? Rich husband, incredible job dash. All the money in the world can't buy happiness. I practically slammed on my brakes. My mother had always made it quite clear that my ultimate goal should be marriage and being well taken care of. The fact that her daughter met and married a billionaire was like one of her soap operas had come true. Hello, she said, all but tapping the mic. You still there? I am, I said, picking my jaw off the floor. You just caught me by surprise. Jesus, she huffed. Give me a little credit, Layla. Before I could remind her about the paparazzi, or any number of things she'd done that contradicted her statement that there was more to life than men and celebrity, she added, I know I've made some missteps, but your happiness is paramount. You're my daughter, and I just want you to be happy. I'd been so eager to arrive at my destination, so I could disconnect, but now that I'd arrived at Bite Restaurant, and we were having some sort of moment, I wanted to savor it. And speaking of happy, I was watching PR the other day with Jeanette, and I would just love it if you could pass along some ideas to Jacob. And she was back. I pulled to the curb in front of Bite, trying to not take it personal. At least she asked how I was, and said something super sweet, before she got to the real reason behind her call. I gotta go. Give Dad a kiss for me. I disconnected and hopped out of the car. I refocused on my mission, meeting Cole, and inviting him over for dinner. I'd cleared out my schedule from 2 p.m. on in an effort to avoid the lunch rush and steal a sit-down with Jacob's brother. But when I stepped through the doors of Bite, I realized that rush probably applied to the time between open and close. The first word that came to mind was bright. It was more than the white walls and vaulted ceilings with chandeliers that seemed to triple the size of the room. It was more than the circular tables, framed by modern yellow armchairs. The oversized floor-to-ceiling windows let the sunshine in. But it was still more than interior decorating magic. It was all about the energy in the room. The excited chatter of the people lined up at the hostess stand. The visibly exhausted server who managed to smile. A real smile, not a fake, wince-inducing one. It was beautifully plated dishes that made their way to the tables. It was the sparkle and glee that rounded the customers' eyes as they brought the first bite to their lips. Things were so bright, so optimistic that I didn't waste time with chit-chat once I made it to the grinning hostess. Table for one. Please seat me in Cole's section. Her smile wavered. What? Cole Summers is on shift this afternoon, right? It was rhetorical since I had already done my research and knew he was working until 5 p.m. Her cheeks darkened, but there was something in her dark brown eyes that told me she wasn't embarrassed. When she pulled herself to every inch of her height, I was sure she was about to challenge me to some sort of duel for Cole's heart. You're a friend of Cole's? I shifted my purse to my other arm, fighting the urge to tell her that I was married and so not interested. I'm kind of in a hurry. And starving. She glared me up and down, then slapped on a smile that looked like she was sucking on a lemon. Right this way. I practically sprinted trying to keep up with her. The brightness I'd seen a whirl of color now. The voices were teeth-gratingly loud. The food overwhelmed my senses. And I didn't see Cole. Are you overstepping your bounds? Doing the exact kind of meddling that you chastise and avoid your mother for? I didn't give those questions a second thought, focusing instead on the fact that the restaurant was significantly bigger than it looked. Or she was taking me to some secret room to off the competition. Just as I was about to ask for an ETA, she dumped me at a table near the back, whipping a menu in my direction like a frisbee. He'll be right with you. Enjoy. As delicious as the room smelled, my eyes didn't scan the plates on the table. They searched the staff. Blonde, tall, with gray eyes, should have been easy to spot, but I came up empty. I glanced down at my hands, the tremble rippling through me, and taking the menu along for the ride. Nerves were natural in these kinds of situations, but I searched for a liquid remedy anyway. Just as I was about to grab the nearest server and order a bottle of wine, a high-pitched giggle pulled my attention toward the kitchen. I knew that giggle. It had even fell from my lips a couple of times. That giggle happened when you like someone, and you're a bundle of awkward. Nothing you say comes out right, because you can't utter the one thing that everyone can see. You like him. A guy and a girl were leaning against the bar. Their backs were toward me, but I knew it was Cole. It was more than the fact that he hit every characteristic on the list. He towered above his coworker. His blonde hair hung in shaggy waves, and when he brushed it from his eyes, the giggle became a sigh. I knew it was Cole because he had the same power as Jacob. The ability to make a woman do just about anything with a single look. When he turned toward me, that look snatched all the air from my lungs. If Jacob's eyes were the sky, Cole's were the sea. Blue-gray. Vast. Mysterious. A curious smile curved his lips because I was staring, but I could tell from his stride that he was used to being stared at. He wore an ebony-colored button-down shirt and light-colored jeans, with every ounce of sophistication that his brother exuded in a suit. His smile deepened when he approached my table, and heat involuntarily rushed to my cheeks. There was one key difference between the brothers. Where Jacob was guarded, an intriguing puzzle that revealed his innermost desires with every piece that clicked together, there was no wall with Cole. He was an open book, and right now every page was etched with the word sex. He stripped me down with his eyes, licking his lips with approval. Mortified, I broke the trance and brought my hands, specifically my left, to the table. I put on my business voice. Hello. Cole, right? The one and only, he winked, his voice deep and all charm. And I know we don't know each other. I never forget a pretty face. Oh God. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. Does that line really work? He leaned in. On closer inspection, I saw that his features were much sharper than Jacob's. Predatory. Between you and me, yes. He gave me another dazzling smile and stood upright. But that's enough about me, Dash. Actually, it isn't. I scooped my flyaways behind my ear and skipped to the end. I'm Jacob's wife, Layla. Do you have a break soon? I'd like to talk to you. The smile dropped to the floor. You're Jacob's wife? I nodded slowly. And you're his brother. But you haven't seen the birth certificate. He meant it as a joke, but the bitterness cut like a knife. I offered him a small smile. I knew you were his brother the minute I saw you. His gray eyes sparkled mischievously, and his lips parted like he had something to say, but he changed his mind and went quiet. He studied me, not in the overtly sexual manner like before, but with genuine interest. Somehow, that made me even more uncomfortable. I snatched my gaze from his, scouring the menu as I fidgeted in my seat. I guess I should order something. I've got you. He eased the menu out of my grasp. I'll run to the back and put your order in and grab a break, so I can learn everything there is to know about my brother and his beautiful wife. Blushing all over again, I shook it off and watched him head back to the pass that separated the dining area from the kitchen. An older woman in a white shirt and jeans exited the kitchen, and Cole's admirer quickly got back to work, along with everyone in the near vicinity. Manager, I murmured, expecting Cole's exterior to change too, but the woman changed instead, her hawkish gaze softening. Her lips eased into a grin that she covered by shooing Cole away. He pecked her on the cheek and made his way back towards me, the look on his face confirming what he said to me. That innate charm or draw must have been a genetic thing. He pulled the chair from the opposite side of the table to a few inches from mine. While he was settling in, I scooted a few inches away, prepared for the game this round. He smirked, my distance not lost on him. You know I don't bite. Unless that's your thing. Cut that out. I hissed, pulling my blazer tighter. I'm pretty much your sister. He shook his head. I have a sister. She's 16 going on 30. Everything is boys, Instagram, Beyoncé and volleyball. He smiled to himself. She's back in Seattle, but we talk all the time. Somebody has to keep her on the straight and narrow. I relaxed, the peek behind the flirty, aggressive curtain revealing a loving, supportive brother. She's lucky to have you. He perked. You have brothers, sisters? Only child, I answered. Then you're the lucky one, he joked. Being an only child means you avoid these kinds of situations. No long-lost siblings popping up at your business meetings. His voice sharpened. What did he call me? He snapped when it came to him. A disruption. He called you a disruption. I frowned. He definitely left that out. Cole sat back, a weird look on his face. Among other things. I didn't know what to say. I knew Jacob. Knew that this was the last thing he expected. I knew that he was angry at his mother. But also angry at fate. That he lost all the time with Cole. That didn't align with Jacob going off on him. Luckily, the awkward silence that followed Cole's admission was brief, since our first course was up. The flirty coworker couldn't wait to sneak in a few more minutes with Cole, and I watched him woo her, tease her, then send her on her way. Like a switch was flipped, he went from smiling and laughing to dead serious with no light or warmth to be found. I take it Jacob redacted a few things, he said coolly. Like how he would contact me if he ever felt the urge to know me. And that sharing DNA didn't make us brothers, it just meant our mother was a whore. What? I shook my head slowly at first, then more enthusiastically as I replayed Cole's words. They aren't close, but Jacob wouldn't call his mother a whore. And he's cautious because he doesn't want to get hurt. But I know that Jacob wants to know you. That he feels like a life was taken from him. Cole looked away, his jaw tight and unyielding. He's had a change of heart then, because the last time I saw him he made it pretty clear that he never wanted to see me again. I still couldn't wrap my brain around Jacob ripping his brother a new one. But in the heat of the moment, faced with the fallout of his mother's secrets, he could have lost it. If I asked myself, why didn't he tell me the whole story? It opened up a whole new can of worms. So I let it go. It happened. Things were said that clearly weren't meant. The only important question was, what now? That's why I'm here. I said, fiddling with my napkin. He wants to see you. We want you to come over for dinner. He blinked. Jacob wants to see me? I nodded. Well, those exact words hadn't been uttered. But that was the general gist of it. You're inviting me over to dinner? Cole asked like he was waiting for the catch. Absolutely. We'd love to have you. His coworker breezed past and the two of them exchanged sultry looks. Feel free to bring your girlfriend. Tracy, he snorted. We're just special friends. He gave me a look that explained just how special. Oh Lord, I groaned. Okay, so bring someone or not. Whatever makes you feel most comfortable. I swallowed a forkful of Caesar salad. Are you free tonight? Wow, I can be? He was suddenly nervous, picking at the tablecloth. Can I ask you a favor? Of course. He glanced up then back down. I feel like the only way this works is if we start over. Forget what happened when he came here, and I told him who I was, and Cole cleared his throat, looking up at me with renewed purpose. I don't even want to talk about it. We need a completely clean slate. I put a hand on his arm. Clean slate. You got it. You just make sure you bring an empty stomach. Family dinner and a fresh start. Chapter 9. Layla, have you lost your mind? I pretended I didn't hear Megan, even though she was on speakerphone and me, the delivery guy, and half the building must have heard her screech. I flashed him a tight smile as I signed for the catering order. Do you need help setting up Dash? She needs help, all right, Megan answered for me. In fact, I think you should take all the food back. If there's no food, maybe she won't go through with this fantastically bad idea. I reached over and put her on mute, handing the paper back to the delivery guy. Thanks, but I have it covered. He didn't seem too convinced either, but he tapped the rim of his ball cap. Good luck. I waited for him to leave, refusing to let his doubt creep in too. He didn't have all the details, just the brief meltdown Megan had been in the throes of when I told her about the impromptu dinner. I inhaled the herb and meaty deliciousness that wafted from the bag on the bar. A part of me hoped the involuntary muting would piss her off, and she'd hang up. But it was wishful thinking. The call was still connected. I tapped the unmute button, ready to apologize. But she clearly didn't even notice that I put her on silent in the first place. After lunch, I thought we agreed that you are prone to overreacting, jumping to conclusions and such. I pulled out the containers of food, trying to keep my voice level. What does any of that have to do with a harmless dinner? Please, she scoffed. Harmless? This is life-changing information. Jacob has a brother that his mother categorically denied until fairly recently. He kept it to himself. And when he told you, your first reaction is to hunt down his brother and set up some sort of reunion dinner. Reunion denotes that there was some sort of established relationship, and they're being reunited after a period of time. Doesn't really apply to this situation. Thank you, dictionary.com. I'm just trying to help, I snapped. Jacob's hurting, Cole's hurting Dash. And I'm not sure it's your job to be the glue that fixes it. You can't force these kinds of things. I was saved by a text from Jacob. I snatched up the reprieve. That's Jacob. I'll let you know how it goes. Layla Dash. I disconnected and silenced the building knots in my stomach, scrolling to my unread messages. Jacob was leaving the office. My fingers trembled as I tapped out that I had a surprise. My world stood still while I waited for his reply. Jacob, you know how I love your surprises. Smiley face. Warmth ricocheted over me as I put aside my phone and focused on making tonight a night to be remembered. Because I'm doing the right thing. I said aloud, marching toward the kitchen. I swiped a couple of nice plates and serving dishes. I was a blur of movement, not thinking, just moving. The pasta was piled high. The salad was bright and tossed. The bread was buttered and savory. I pulled an unopened bottle of wine from the cabinet and swiped 3 glasses. Once the table was set, everything perfect and in its place, I was left with the quiet, and the quiet gave my nerves the chance to magnify. What if Megan was right? What if I was just making it worse? What if it wasn't my place? I frowned, that statement like something sour on my tongue. Making sure Jacob was happy was my place. I put the finishing touches on the spread, lighting some candles for ambience. Zen relaxed, good food. And hopefully good positive conversation. I braced myself on the table as I took in the empty plates. Blank slate. It was still hard to wrap my mind around Jacob ripping into his brother. But tonight wasn't about rehashing things that were done out of anger. It was about healing and moving forward. The elevator chimed, and I rushed to the mirror in the living room, giving my reflection a final look. Curls were pulled into a bun at the top of my head, with a few in the front trickling down. Gloss and mascara outlined my features, but nothing too intense. Understated black dress and casual black flats completed the look. I crossed my legs and waited for him, hoping that Megan was wrong. Hoping that tiny voice inside my head was overreacting. Praying I wasn't making a mistake. Jacob stopped in the doorway, a smile brightening his tired face. "You ordered in?" He took stock of the dining room. "Pasta, wine, candles, what's the dash?" My heart seized when he stopped talking, probably counting the plates, and realizing that it wasn't a dinner for two. He peeled off his jacket, his tone a little less excited. "Rough around the edges. Who's joining us for dinner?" The knots tightened. "See, Cole, I was so sure this was the right move, that I just needed to get the two brothers in the same room, and everything would work itself out. But when I saw Jacob's face, I realized I was wrong. I made a huge mistake." Jacob's face was darkened with anger, his eyes turning to Cole as he glared at me like my very existence was enough to make him want to put his fist through the wall. He didn't move, and neither did I, terrified that the slightest movement, even a blink, would make him burn the entire building to the ground. "I'm sorry. It sounded like you said that Cole was joining us for dinner, but I must be mistaken." His voice was savage. "Tell me I'm mistaken, Layla." I couldn't look at him. I couldn't breathe. And as badly as I wanted to, I couldn't lie. I did ask him over, but Jacob didn't wait for the rest, storming into the next room. I saw the tense lines in his back, the way his muscles rippled because he couldn't stop shaking. Everything in me except my heart said to give him space, but I followed him instead. I had to make him understand. The way you talked about him, all the lost time. I just wanted to help. Give you a chance to hear his story. And he can hear yours. The elevator intercom buzzed and I winced. I knew it was Cole before his voice filtered through the speaker. "Hello? Anybody there?" "He's here." Jacob had murder in his eyes. "You really had no intention of giving me an opportunity to decline. Dinner or else." My throat was on fire, regret bringing emotion to my eyes. "Jacob, please." He made a grand gesture. "Ladies first. Or maybe it was go to hell. He's your guest. By all means, buzz him up." I went to the wall console, my finger hovering above the button. Jacob pulled out his chair with an unsettling screech. "Don't worry. I won't stab him before the first course." That should have been a sign that he was cooling off. But considering Jacob rarely made jokes, my heart was still in my gut. I pressed the buzzer, trying to make my voice normal, and not like my husband was a ticking time bomb. "See, come on up, Cole." I dropped my hand, realizing that there really was no going back now. Realizing that the pressure in my chest must have been twice as heavy for Jacob. Fear, anger, nerves, he was trapped. I thought dinner would be freeing, but from the way Jacob gripped the arm of his chair, his body made of stone, I realized that he was a prisoner, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. Before I could utter another apology that he ignored, the elevator announced my betrayal. Jacob didn't move a single muscle, but I somehow managed to turn my head and plaster on a smile. Cole had swapped the casual attire from work with a navy blue sweater and khakis. His white blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail that made him look worldly. He held a bottle of wine in one hand, a bouquet of red roses in the other, and an expression that said he knew this was a bad idea. But it was too late to turn back now. "Cole!" I croaked, my voice breaking. I clutched the pearls around my neck, wondering if Jacob would say something. "Anything. Are you okay, Layla?" Cole asked, nearly rushing to my side until Jacob finally had a reaction. He hurled a look in his brother's direction that stopped him dead in his tracks. Cole's eyes flashed, but he pulled his lips into a smile. "I came bearing gifts. To thank you two for having me over." He extended the roses to me, and the bottle to Jacob. Jacob dismissed the olive branch, reaching for the bottle of wine on the table instead. Cole tensed, but I put a hand on his shoulder, smiling until it hurt. I've got M. Thanks. Why don't you have a seat, and after I put these in water, we can start on dinner? He hesitated, then carefully maneuvered to the chair beside Jacob. Once he was seated and the awkward silence filled the room like poison, I dashed to the kitchen to catch my breath and come up with a plan to salvage the evening. My heart throttled my eardrums, and when I filled the vase with water, I was tempted to throw it back. My body was filled with dread. Well, you're here now. There's no turning back. You're in the middle of this, so you might as well make the most of it. I placed the vase on the bar, reminding myself that it wasn't all on me, and each one of them had made moves without realizing it. Jacob could have left, or refused to have Cole in his home. Cole didn't have to bring anything to dinner but himself, and he didn't have to sit next to Jacob, especially when Jacob was doing his best to ignore his existence. We all were just trying to make sense of this thing I forced on us. With a little bit of clarity and a spark of hope, I went back into the dining room. Jacob looked straight ahead. Cole glanced up at me with an uncomfortable grin. This looks amazing. I wish I could take all the credit, I winked. He turned to Jacob, his eyes widening with surprise. You helped with all of this? Jacob finally looked at him. It's kind of difficult to help with something that you're completely unaware of. Cole's eyes shifted between the two of us, then rested on me. I twisted my mouth to one side in my best my bad, and prepared myself for an earful. He reached for the wine and filled his glass, taking a hearty swallow before he spoke. How I got here doesn't matter. I'm just glad I'm here. Jacob's eyes flickered to me, then his brother. No one likes a kiss-ass kid. Jacob, I hissed, giving him a pointed look that he completely ignored. But Cole was unfazed, his eyes sparkling with amusement. I've found that a little charm goes a long way. Well, you can keep your charm to yourself. I was trying to give Jacob the benefit of the doubt. Cut him some slack because this was all dumped in his lap. His brother, and now this dinner. But it was becoming clear that Jacob had no intention of giving Cole a fair shake. Maybe he did say those things to Cole. The man beside me was so filled with animosity that it made me ache. And it pissed me off. No one is asking you two to pick up like your long-lost friends. But if you think we're going to have a repeat of your last run-in, and I'm going to sit here while you talk down dash. Jacob whipped his head in my direction, a frown filling his face. You know what, I get it. We both glanced at Cole. He threw his hands up. I understand. I kind of set fire to your relationship with your mother dash. Our relationship was ash long before you entered the picture. Jacob cut in, his attention on his brother. I'm not angry with you. I don't even think I'm technically angry at her, though she's behind all of this. I'm angry with myself. Angry that for the first time, I thought about the past with regret. Regret is weakness. Everyone makes decisions that lead them to this moment. You can't change the past, but I found myself wishing that I could go back and know you. Not thinking, I reached out and put my hand on top of Jacob's. He didn't rebuff me, lifting his fingers slightly to stroke mine. So much time we lost dash. Then let's not miss a second more. Cole interjected gently. Let's start over. He pushed back from the table, and a smile crept across my face as he walked backward until he hit the doorway. He held his head high and dusted his palms. Without a word, he walked back to the table. He pivoted to Jacob, extending his hand. Hi, I'm Cole. Jacob stared at his hand intently, like he knew it was more than just a hand, more than a peace offering, more than a new beginning. If he shook Cole's hand, it meant he was letting his guard down. It meant he could be hurt. But I crossed my fingers and hoped that he saw that the boundaries he built around himself didn't just keep out the pain, but they walled him in. He had to let go. Jacob rose from his seat slowly, then shook his brother's hand. I'm Jacob. Chapter 10. I pretended like I was being productive, my attention on the laptop perched in my lap. But leaving Jacob and Cole to have time to themselves after dinner was really just a cover. I'd snatched up pieces of conversation, each laugh, each smile behind words making me feel less and less like the worst wife ever. After they reintroduced themselves, Jacob had honored their unspoken truce. He talked about growing up, lonely even though he was surrounded by kids just like him. Rich kids discarded by ambivalent parents. He talked about turning Whitmore and Creighton from an underdog to a contender in the field of public relations. When a publicity shitstorm hit, Whitmore Creighton was the first name that came to mind for damage control. Cole talked about growing up in a whole different world. He was adopted by a middle-class family. His mother was a teacher. His father owned an auto shop. Cole was their oldest, and his sister, Melody, was their miracle that came 8 years later. He graduated with a degree in English literature and wanted to be a high school English teacher. Like his mom, they talked about everything from politics to their worst hangovers. Everything but Alicia. She was the elephant in the room, the only subject that was forbidden. Before I left, I wanted to tell them that tiptoeing around Alicia Whitmore was exactly what she wanted. That she was the person that connected them couldn't ever truly be disregarded. But I didn't want to derail their progress. I leaned in, clutching my laptop as I strained to listen when their laughter drifted from the dining room. "You sure you got enough to eat?" Jacob's voice was warm, friendly. "Absolutely. Too much even." A chair scraped against the floor. "I better head out. Back to work bright and early." He came into the main room, seeking me out. He waved, his smile bright and disarming. "Thanks again for having me over, Layla." "Anytime," I replied, biting my lip when Jacob appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an arched eyebrow. "If that's okay with you?" "Now she asks me," he said sarcastically, but I saw the half smile on his lips. He faced Cole, holding out his hand. "You're welcome anytime. We'll talk soon. Handshakes are for strangers and business." Cole bypassed the hand, embracing Jacob. The shock on Jacob's face melted into a look so hopeful that my heart leaped in my chest. He mumbled something and clapped his brother on the back, and Cole made his exit, leaving us staring at the spot where he stood. I felt Jacob's eyes on me, but I couldn't bear to look into his eyes and see disappointment. "I know you're pissed, Dash." "I'm not pissed." I jerked my gaze upward, sure that I misheard him. "You're not." He crossed his arms, his face hopelessly unreadable. "Get over here." I slid my laptop onto the cushion, but made no other moves toward him. "What?" "You heard me." His voice deepened to that delicious, terrifying timbre that made me tremble and melt all at once. That roped me in, tied me down, and claimed me. "Get over here." I slid from the couch, the hardwood floor cool against my feet, but doing nothing to the heat that was taking over. I'd been so on edge, so worried about what came next that all the worries dropped onto me. One foot in front of the other, hoping for something I didn't deserve. Hoping that he not only forgave me, but that he'd touch me and make it real. Fill me and whisper that he loved me, flaws and all. I stopped a few feet away from him, close enough that I could see all the ways he turned a shirt and tie into the sexiest thing he's ever seen. I saw the deep shade of brown that flickered through his locks, the candlelight turning his strands gold. His eyes were deep blue, rushing over me, pulling me under. He was so close that his breath was my breath, so close that I felt every emotion flowing through him. His anger, his frustration. When he pulled me toward him, my body crashing into his, I was close enough to feel his lust. I hitched a breath as he fisted my hair, blue eyes catching fire. "After what you did, I have every right to be angry, to be furious. But I can't think when you look at me like that, Layla." My lips were inches from his, quivering, aching. "Like what?" "Like you see me. All of me. And you love me anyway." He cupped my cheek, his thumb strumming my cheek so softly that I felt the music in my bones. I stared up at him, so open, so vulnerable, and I spoke the truth in my heart. "How could I not love you, Jacob? You're my world. And I'm S-. Shoo." He took my face in both hands, his forehead pressed against mine as his eyes bore into mine. "Don't apologize. I know your heart was in the right place. I don't like that you essentially ambushed me, but that's you. You fiercely worry about the people you love, and you're willing to do anything for them. I wish for someone like you. And now that you're mine, I'm never letting you go." He consumed my mouth and I breathed him in. His love, his moans, his desire. This kiss was more than lips and tongue, and our teeth clashing as we clawed at each other. This kiss was my apology, his apology, the taste and feel of "I screwed up, and all I want is for everything to be okay." I paused, chest pumping, dress half on and half off, hair wild and messy. Jacob's shirt was missing a few buttons, his face flushed, his pants snug as his cock pierced through the fabric. "Are we okay?" He stood before me, his lips rounding into a sensual smile. He reached out and freed my hair from its lopsided bun, traced my jawline with his fingertips. He fingered the material of my dress, and slowly pulled it the rest of the way over my shoulders, down over my breasts and further still. He was so close to my core. My lack of panties reveled and appreciated the pleased rumble at the back of his throat. "I could say that we're okay. Tell you all the ways I love and want you, but I'd much rather show you." Oh God. My dress was at my ankles, restricting my movement, but I was just wide enough that I could feel just how wet I was. Feel the warmth of his breath on my skin. The electric sensation when his fingers slipped inside of me. I was enslaved to his touch. He moved inside me deeper, harder until I clung to him, needing more of this, more of him. I tried to step out of my dress, but he lifted me up and pinned me against the wall. His fingers were still inside me, his eyes filled with so much love, so much passion. His gaze was as intimate, as visceral as him being inside of me, pumping and stretching and overwhelming me. I dug my fingernails into his shoulders and raked my way down his arms. I tore his shirt off the rest of the way. I felt so alive, so desperate to have no secrets, no space, no clothing between us. He pulled from me, cupping my face with his lust-drenched fingers. "I need to be inside you," he said thickly. "Right here. Right now." I stepped out of my dress and kicked it aside. "Then take me." He ripped open his fly, the thick, vein length of him rock hard and ready. I ached for him inside me. He gripped one of my legs, opening my body for him. He braced himself against the wall, looking at me like I was the beginning and end of everything. Like he was saved and doomed all at once. "The only thing that can destroy me is you, Layla. Losing you, losing your love dash." "I'm right here, Jacob," I said breathlessly. Every part of me was his, from the top of my head to my toes. "I'm yours." I half straddled him, one leg in his grip, the other on the ground. He lifted me up, his fingertips gripping my ass for dear life as he rocked into me, deep, furious, and up against the wall because we couldn't wait one more moment to be together. I clutched him with my hands, with my body. It was so much pleasure, too much pleasure to bear. I felt the nearness of my climax. It consumed me. It consumed him. "Don't stop," I said breathlessly. "Please don't stop." He buried his mouth in the nape of my neck. "Let go, lay. I'll catch you." So I did, and the world exploded in a sea of color and lust. He filled me until I could take no more. My vision blurred, and I was so out of control, lost and found. He kissed me until I had no air left in my lungs. He surrendered to me, and I knew I was completely and hopelessly his. Still relearning to breathe, I looked up at him. He braced himself against the wall, the look on his face pure bliss. That was incredible." I finished with a toothy grin. "My favorite kind of dessert." He ran a hand through his hair as he turned toward the kitchen, making me tremble all over again when I saw his perfect ass. I bit my lip, feeling like I could go another round or four. So one could say that this whole dinner thing was in fact a great idea. He glanced back at me with a spark in his eyes. One could. And that I'm always right. "Don't push your luck," he grinned. "You're always you," which is to say equal parts amazing, sexy, and maddening. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 11. Being the wife of a billionaire came with certain realities. I lived in a penthouse apartment, with a priceless view of the city. As Jacob's assistant, I had a 5-figure clothing allowance. But now I had a black Visa card with no limit. Jacob made it clear that me private jet su private jet. And my problems switched from student loans to, what exotic location do I want to visit on our next trip? Maybe it was because I grew up middle class that I remained grounded. I refused to let Jacob buy me a luxury car. I still carried my own bags, and made it a point to not take any of this for granted. Somehow, even though I looked the part and was married to wealth, I still felt like an outsider. And the rich and those employed by the rich saw right through me. When I stepped inside of Jessica Lenore's building, I knew I was in for an afternoon of her attempting to exert her authority over me. It had nothing to do with the interior design of the place. My apartment building had the same marble statues, gallery-style artwork hung on the walls, exquisite crown molding and attention to detail that came with the exorbitant rent. It wasn't the doorman who all but asked for my social security number when I stepped up to the entrance. It was more than the cold once-over the concierge gave me when I said my name. Jessica's mind games kicked into overdrive when she made me wait in the lobby for half an hour without explanation. Like my time wasn't valuable. Like the whole world stopped and turned on her whim. Just as I was getting ready to cancel our appointment, my name rang out from near the concierge desk. I rolled my eyes, sure the concierge was about to whip out some policy on loitering. But there was another woman waiting. She was modelesque with skin the color of coffee. Her hair was cropped short, accentuating her striking cheekbones. When she smiled, her whole face came alive. She wore a flowing dress that would have looked like a watercolor paper bag on anyone else, but it was ethereal on her. She strode over to me, extending her hand. "I'm Esther. I'd like to apologize on behalf of Ms. Lenore. She had a meeting that was running late." Her acorn-shaped eyes narrowed as she dropped her volume. "That's what she wanted me to tell you anyway. Between you and I, she was procrastinating and hoping if she made you wait long enough you'd go away." I clenched my jaw. I figured as much. I rose to my feet, smoothing the front of my skirt. So what changed her mind? A desire to prove the world and the board wrong. Esther answered without missing a beat. "She'll never admit this. I'm her assistant and I know her better than anyone. She can't do this alone. She needs someone that's not intimidated by her." She smiled conspiratorially as she took me in. "And I can tell from the look on your face that you give as good as you get, and you can steer her in the right direction." The anger that had been eating at me with every passing minute sitting on that beautiful, uncomfortable chair waned slightly. "I appreciate that. Right now, I'd like you to steer me in the direction of her apartment, so we can get to work. Right this way." I followed her into the elevator with at least half a dozen questions. "How long have you been working with Jessica?" She scanned a key card and punched the top floor. "I've known Jess since we were kids. Two badass rich kids with chips on their shoulders." She smiled to herself, like she was conjuring up images of times long past. I didn't point out that Jessica was still living the life with her chip in tow. After our last meeting, she threatened me with some party that would make the headlines, and she didn't disappoint. She invited some indie rock band for a private concert on the rooftop of the building. Traffic was backed up for miles with people stopping to look up at the rich decadents, swaying and dancing to their own music, wondering what it would be like to live in Jessica's world. One look at Esther's face, and I knew that it wasn't nearly as fantastic as it seemed. She needs help. I understood. If she needs to go to rehab she doesn't need rehab, Esther snapped, barely waiting for me as she breezed out of the elevator. The corridor stretched towards a wall of frosted glass. Bamboo floors, wall-to-ceiling windows on both sides. Esther slammed the brakes, and I nearly tumbled into her. She pointed in the direction of the glass. "She's waiting inside. I know her, and she'll put up a front if I'm there." She gave me a sobering look. "Ask the right questions." Before I could ask what that cryptic question meant, Esther was floating in the opposite direction. I was left alone. Silence wasn't a problem since the closer I inched toward Jessica's apartment, the crisper the music that flowed into the hall was. Classical music. The same kind of music Jacob listened to when he needed to shut the rest of the world off and focus. When I opened the door, I half expected to be confronted by a smattering of naked bodies, wall to wall of champagne bottles, used condoms, confetti, and wrinkled couture dresses. Instead, her apartment was spotless. Unassuming furnishings with just the basics. A charcoal gray sectional and ottoman, a dining set. A chair here and there. Artwork framed and leaning against the wall. It looked like a place of transition. Like someone had begun the process of building a home, but stopped at the bones. "I'm upstairs." I followed her voice up the floating staircase, going into publicist mode. Something told me it was going to be a long afternoon. I expected to be called into her office, made to stand while she sat behind her desk, trying to glare me into submission. There was only one person I submitted to, and that person was not Jessica Lenore. I did afford her a courtesy that she denied me and knocked. "You can come in." I tried to not pin too much hope on her cheerful voice. If our last meeting taught me anything, it was that nothing was as it seemed. I opened the door and took in a room that was more of the same. There was a mattress up against the wall, stripped and bare. Bleached white walls. And then there was Jessica. She was dressed in a black jumpsuit. Her mahogany hair pulled into a messy bun on top of her head. She was in front of a bay window, the sun shining in and illuminating the canvas in front of her. If the rest of her apartment was a blank slate, an anonymous story to be written, her canvas was her. Angry slashes of red and black and blue, colors collided and split, and ran together like blood. She pivoted toward me, holding a brush and a look so serene that I almost apologized for disturbing her. The look was fleeting though, along with the urge to apologize when her face darkened with displeasure. I thought I could do this, but now that you're here. She turned back to her canvas. I'd like you to leave. I laughed. Just a single brutal guffaw. Brutal enough that she spun back around to look at me with surprise instead of disgust. And then the laughs wouldn't stop. They shook me from the inside out, pouring out of my lips, squeezing my sides. I wiped the tears, trying to turn off the spigot. When I could breathe without giggling and look at her without finding humor in this crazy situation, I started over again. I don't belong in this world. Your world. All the money, the fame, the excess. I stick out like a sore thumb. I walked over to the bed and kicked off my heels and dropped down with a sigh. The last time I went over to my mother-in-law's, she had a servant whose only job was to make sure her wine glass was filled, and my water remained cold. But this is my life now. I go to the store, and I don't have to look at prices. If I want something, I can have it. There's no need for budgets. No coupons. If I wanted to hop on a plane when I leave here, I could set the destination for anywhere in the world. Jessica's green eyes were still wide with surprise, but a hefty dash of confusion was in the mix. Congratulations on the come-up? You're the American dream. No, I'm the fantasy. The chances of me meeting my husband, falling in love, and marrying a billionaire had to be 1,000,000 to 1. At least. Shit like that doesn't happen in real life. I gestured around us. This apartment, partying all night, properties from here to Tokyo. That doesn't happen in real life. No one takes you seriously, because your life is so far outside of reality. We have to show the world that you're real. She held the brush out like a knife. How the hell do I show the world I'm real? You can start by dropping the act, I said darkly. I don't know why you're pretending you're nothing but a socialite, but it's doing you no favors. Her face was a storm of emotion. Anger, hurt, and guilt lashed across her eyes. Singed her lips. You don't know me. And neither does the world, I answered. I rose from the bed, walking toward her. She backed up a few steps like she was expecting me to hug her, but I looked through her. The indignant, obnoxious girl before me was just as much a front as the party girl. What was on the canvas was closer to the truth. You painted this? She stepped up beside me. Ah, yes. It's probably not very good. I stole a look at her, watching the vicious, overly confident person. I knew her as hide behind this quiet, self-conscious artist. Someone closer to the truth. It's great, actually. Right, she scoffed, like my opinion was worth less than nothing. I bit back the urge to call her on it. To take her to task for doing everything she could to make me not like her. Ask the right questions. I'm a fixer, I said, staring at the slashes on the canvas. Letting them cut away the animosity. It's one of the reasons I went into this field. When I see a disaster, I don't run from it. I run toward it. I like it messy and complicated because I want to be the one that untangles it. But I'm learning that I'm not Superwoman. There are some things I can't fix. Sometimes, I have to step back and give other people the agency and responsibility. I faced her, needing her to look into my eyes and see that I was coming from someplace real. I can't do this for you. I can lead the way, show you the path, but you're the one that has to walk it, Jessica. None of this will work unless you're ready to take the reins. The most important question, the only question that mattered, rang in my head. Do you want to take over your father's company? Yes, she said, not missing a beat. But dash. The but doesn't matter, I interrupted, pulling out my cell phone. The artwork downstairs, is that yours as well? She nodded, finally at a loss for words. Good. We're going to set up an art show for next week. We need to show the world that there's more to you than jet setting and body shots. Which means no more parties unless they're benefit galas or charity events. I glanced up to see if this was all sinking in. Her face was blank, but she nodded, biting her lip then releasing it. Essie has my calendar. I'll go find her so we can nail down some dates. I stopped at the door. And for the record, you're not kind of good. Or merely okay. You're great. Don't forget that. I could have been imagining it, or hoping that I somehow got through, but I could have sworn I heard her whisper thanks. Chapter 12. I was back. The Whitmore estate looked even more foreboding than before because this time, I knew exactly what to expect. Alicia's haughty little grins, her nameless servants, surrounded by her expansive, cold, empty wealth. I reached over and gripped Jacob's knee. You know, it's not too late to turn around. I scrambled for some excuse. I feel a tickle in my throat. Or maybe you have a headache. Or a stomach bug. Some gnarly affliction that just came on. Interestingly enough, it occurred after the security guard already alerted her to our arrival. He rounded the circular driveway, killing the engine before he looked at me. I knew he wanted to be here even less than I did, but it didn't make any of this easier. Trust me, I don't want to do this either. But the only way to beat my mother at her game is to look her in the face and let her see that she didn't win. I'm not going to hide or avoid her. I need to look her in the face when I tell her to go to hell. And I can smile gleefully as she gnashes her teeth and threatens to reveal whatever skeleton she has left. Jacob interlocked our fingers, his eyes going dark with anger. Unless she has another son or daughter in her back pocket, there's no way she can hurt me more than she already has. I lifted our hands to my lips and kissed his skin. I know it took a lot to come here. I'm proud of you. He released me with a bitter chuckle. The night's still young. My mother has the impressive talent of bringing out the worst in me. Like he knew I was about to make a last-ditch effort to get the hell out of Dodge, Jacob eased out of the car, walking briskly to my side and pulling the door open. There was no escape now. I reluctantly accepted his hand. We can do this. We can do this. He looked like a man ready to go into battle. His suit was his armor, his dark hair slicked back, so the enemy could see just how fearless he was. When he pushed me back against the car and gave me a kiss that made the world spin, I realized I was wrong. I was his armor. He ended the kiss too soon, taking my bottom lip between his teeth and tugging until the throb between my thighs was a consuming ache that could only be sated if he took me. Right there. Right now. He wet his lips, and I swore I could feel his tongue on me. Licking, flicking, swirling, tasting. His hands skimmed my side, the unspoken language of our bodies taking over. He wasn't really going to, but he had already hiked up my skirt. My panties were already to the side. His fingers dove inside me, and I threw my head back, letting loose a moan that was devoured by the darkness. His mouth was on mine, his cock so hard that, ahem, crap. For the briefest moment, everything ceased to exist but his fingers and lips, and I forgot that we were standing in front of Alicia's house. Jacob slowly ejected his fingers, and my jaw dropped when he didn't acknowledge his mother's existence at all. He looked deep into my eyes and brought his fingers to his lips, suckling each one, making me quiver for more. Honestly, Jacob, she hissed, you couldn't contain yourself long enough to get through dinner? He ignored her, holding out his arm to me. Blushing all kinds of red, I fixed my skirt and accepted it, deflecting the daggers Alicia was throwing my way with a smile. Let's get this over with, he spat, leading me toward the house. When I stepped inside, I expected to see Miles, but there was an older woman standing beside the door instead. She was dressed in a plain charcoal-colored dress, both hands locked at her side, a plastic smile fitting for a mannequin on her face. With the Shirley Temple curls that framed her face, and the fact that she literally moved no muscles, it was downright eerie. I heard Alicia behind us, silent, and cussing us out at the same time. I focused on the woman instead, holding out my hand. Hi, I'm Layla. And you are? The help, Alicia answered for her, closing the door crisply behind her. My mother-in-law was dressed in a pantsuit that matched the color of her heart black. She waved the woman away. Please make sure everything is ready for our guests. The woman practically curtsied. Right away, ma'am. Jacob sensed my discomfort, as I watched the woman hustle away like her life depended on it. It's just the three of us, Mother. Surely we can manage dinner on your own. Alicia flicked her bangs to the side like she was discarding that notion. I know you're playing poor for your wife's benefit, but things have been done a certain way in this home, and will be continued to be done as such. She strutted past me like I was invisible. I already had to let someone go because he forgot his place. I remembered Miles, so terrified to even breathe, too terrified to even give his name. You fired him? How could Dash? Layla, Jacob said gently. His eyes told me to pick my battles, and this was one I'd lose. The anger was already eating me alive, and we hadn't even been here for 5 minutes. She fired someone to punish me. What kind of person plays games with people's lives that way? It was all my fault. I just wanted her to see him as a person, and it cost his job. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see anything but red. I couldn't move. I can't do this, I said hoarsely, so furious that I could go no further. I can't sit at a table with her. She makes me sick, Jacob. He stepped in front of me, cupping both sides of my face. I'll be right beside you. Once we say our piece, we'll leave. I promise. Alicia stood in the distance, waiting in the doorway of the dining room impatiently. What are you waiting for, dear? A trumpet? The red carpet treatment. There will be sharp things, I told Jacob tersely. I can't be held responsible for my actions. He grinned, his face lighting up with amusement. Duly noted. Smiling despite the heartache, I trailed behind Jacob, traveling deeper into the lion's den. I wanted to oh and ah over the table. Plates were piled high with fruits and vegetables and meat and pastries. But I kept seeing the blank stare of her staff. It seemed like an awful lot of trouble to go through for a dinner for 3. Jacob pulled out my chair, then slid me closer to the plates piled high with culinary delights before he joined me. From the scowl on his face, he left his appetite at home. Alicia assumed the role of gracious host. Once the servant filled her glass, she raised it in a toast. To my guests. Her teeth sparkled as brightly as the diamonds in her ears. To family. She couldn't be serious. I peered over at Jacob, and I could tell he was similarly appalled. He didn't raise his glass, but he did give his mother his undivided attention. Family, he said, rounding every syllable of the word. What an interesting word coming from you. You, who clearly cannot comprehend what such a word means. I found his hand beneath the table and held tight. He took a breath and squeezed it back, then released. He could do this. He had to do this. I met my brother, Jacob continued, his voice filling the room. The family that you gave away, then lied about it. To my face. His eyes smoldered. Repeatedly. The smile was snatched from Alicia's lips. Those striking genes that she passed on to Jacob and Cole hardened to ice. I thought we agreed that we wouldn't discuss this anymore. I admitted the truth. And you told me you'd drop it. That you didn't want a relationship with the boy. You just wanted to hear the truth. I pulled my hand from Jacob. Confusion was catching tonight. You never told me you didn't want a relationship with Cole Dash. Things changed, Jacob snapped. His voice softened when he glanced over at me. You helped me see that I was missing out on something special. The chance to know my little brother. Oh God, Alicia snorted. She rang her condescending little bell, and the servant leapt to action. Alicia nodded at her wine glass. I'm going to need the whole bottle, I'm afraid. My son has gone soft. That bitch. Are you really that oblivious? I exclaimed, throwing my napkin on the table. I don't know why I foolishly believed I could hold my peace with Alicia Whitmore in the room. But I wouldn't let her hurt my Jacob. Not again. Never again. Somehow your son still loves you. He still cares, even after all the horrible things you've done. And you sit here in your gilded cage and laugh at him. You don't deserve his love. How can someone so lucky, so blessed, be so goddamn evil? Evil? Alicia put down her glass and put both hands on the table, like she was bracing herself for something big. I am not perfect, but I am trying. Dash. Being honest should not be an Olympic feat, Jacob spat, rebuffing her sorry attempt at an explanation. What I asked of you didn't require a limb or your life, or anything you were incapable of giving. You chose to lie. You chose to punish me, just like you've punished me all my life. Punish you? I watched in awe as Alicia Whitmore shattered before my eyes. It was night and day. Jekyll and Hyde. The always poised, always collected woman was in bits and pieces, her shrieks clawing at my eardrums. I was trying to spare you, Jacob. This truth was my burden to bear. Her eyes were crazed, glassy with emotion. When the servant came back with the bottle of wine, she retreated slowly, like she was all too familiar with this brand of monster. And if she got too close, Alicia would tear her to shreds. What did he tell you? She hollered. Jacob was tense, but I saw the concern in his eyes. The worry. Calm down, Dash. What did Cole tell you? She battened down the hatches, going full on crazy. What lies did he fill your head with? Did he tell you what a good family he grew up with? How much he missed you? Jacob exchanged glances with me, then cleared his throat, giving nothing away. I had his story checked out, Dash. Not well enough, Alicia said coldly. I thought you got your brains from me, but you're just like your father. A hopeless romantic. A fool. I jerked to my feet, 2 seconds away from smacking her across the face. But one look at Alicia, and I knew there was nothing I could do to her that she wasn't already doing to herself. Me nor Jacob knew what to do. She was clearly having some sort of a mental breakdown. She dropped her head in her hands, her sobs the most hollow and heartbreaking sound I had ever heard. It was the cry of someone that knew they'd lost everything. Someone who'd reached the end of their rope and had nothing left but death. Whatever goodwill she'd garnered with her son was sadly evaporating. Calling him a lovesick fool did her no favors. If you have something to say, I suggest you say it. Alicia drew a shuddering breath, her body still shaking. She looked up with red, tear-soaked eyes. I stood by your father through every affair. I had one moment of weakness, one indiscretion. She squeezed her eyes shut like she couldn't bear the shame. I wanted to keep Cole, but your father made it clear that he would not share his home or his wife with another man's child. We went through a reputable agency and found him a lovely home. But something happened and he ended up in foster care. Her voice rattled as fresh tears streamed down her face. The things he must have endured, Dash. She let that hang in the air, electrifying the room with the terrible images that you hear about in the news. Defenseless, precious children neglected by those who were supposed to protect them. I shut my eyes and saw Cole. Remembered his story about a happy childhood, a happy family. It couldn't all be a lie. Alicia swept her hand over her cheeks, raising her chin as she faced her son. Cole Summers murdered his foster family when he was 14 years old. He was institutionalized until he was 21. He reached out to me when he was released. She swallowed hard, her strong, defiant chin trembling. He told me he only has one goal: life. Destroying all things Whitmore.